In the 9th century, Scandinavia was a world apart, a vast territory of deep fjords, dense forests and jagged coastlines that spread across northern Europe, encompassing what we now know as Denmark, Norway and Sweden. At that time, there were no unified kingdoms or defined borders, only local chieftains, scattered farms, and a growing network of sea routes that was about to transform Europe forever. Within a few decades, the peoples who lived in these frozen lands would reach shores they had never imagined, from Constantinople to Iceland, from Baghdad to the coast of North America. In this video, I use modern artificial intelligence tools to bring to life historical paintings, maps, and engravings from the Viking Age, shifting perspectives, changing camera angles, and moving through these scenes in ways their original artists could never have done. The goal is not just to look at the past, but to step into it, to walk through Scandinavia as it was, and imagine what it would have been like to be here, among fjords and longhouses, among merchants and warriors, in a world that did not yet know the word that would define it forever. And if you stay until the end, we will compare these same places with how they look today, to see what time has changed and what still remains. Before we set foot in 9th century Scandinavia, it is worth understanding how this land presented itself. The landscape was dominated by narrow fjords that cut into the Norwegian coast like scars left by ancient glaciers, creating natural harbors where vessels could anchor sheltered from wind and waves. Further inland, forests of pine and birch stretched for miles, providing the timber that would be the foundation of everything these peoples built, from houses to ships. In Denmark, the terrain was flatter, with fertile plains and pastures that fed herds of cattle and sheep. In Sweden, immense lakes like Mälaren connected the interior to the Baltic coast, forming natural trade corridors that would be exploited with impressive skill. The vast majority of people who lived in Scandinavia during this period were farmers. Contrary to what is often imagined, daily life did not revolve around raids and battles, but around the land, the seasons, and survival. Families lived in longhouses called langhus, rectangular structures built of wood, with walls that curved slightly outward, giving the building the appearance of an inverted boat. These houses could be between 15 and 22 meters long, and the largest ones, belonging to powerful chieftains, reached an impressive 67 meters. The interior was organized around a central hearth that provided warmth, light, and a gathering point for the entire family. Smoke rose through an opening in the roof, and along the walls there were built-in benches that served both for sitting during the day and sleeping at night. Animals and people shared the same space during the harshest winter months, when temperatures made any prolonged exposure to the outdoors dangerous. Now, let us move to one of the most important centers of this Norse world. On the island of Björkö, in Lake Mälaren in present-day Sweden, lay Birka, considered the first Swedish city and one of the most important trading posts of the Viking Age. Founded around the middle of the 8th century, Birka flourished for over 200 years as the Baltic link in the trade route that ran through Ladoga and Novgorod to the Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Caliphate. Merchants from all over Europe and parts of the East brought Arab silver, glass beads from Eastern Europe, ceramics, and fine fabrics from Asia, exchanging them for local products such as iron, furs, antlers, and amber. The city housed between 500 and 1,000 inhabitants, protected by earthen and stone ramparts, and a small fortress at the highest point of the island. Imagine arriving at Birka by water, in one of those shallow draft boats that glided over the calm waters of the lake. The first sign of the city would be the smoke from workshops and hearths, then the noise of the harbor, where vessels of different sizes crowded together along wooden piers. Craftsmen worked iron, cast bronze, carved bone and antler, producing everything from simple tools to elaborate jewelry. In this very place, around 831, The Frankish monk Ansgar established the first Christian congregation in Sweden, at a time when the vast majority of the population still followed the ancient Norse religion. The coexistence between Christian merchants and Norse pagans in Birka is one of the most fascinating aspects of this period, revealing a society far more cosmopolitan than is generally imagined. Moving south, at the base of the Jutland Peninsula, where northern Germany lies today, we find Hedeby, which along with Birka was the most important Viking trading center in Europe. Its location was strategic, positioned at the narrowest point between the North Sea and the Baltic Sea, allowing merchants to avoid the dangerous voyage around the tip of Denmark. Formerly founded around 808 by the Danish king Godfrey, who transferred merchants from a rival Slavic town called Rerik to strengthen the new trading post, Hedeby grew rapidly. At its peak, around the end of the 9th century, the city occupied an area enclosed by semicircular earthen ramparts, approximately 9 meters high, and housed roughly 1,500 inhabitants. The houses were small and densely packed in a kind of grid, with streets running east to west down to the harbor piers. Life there was short and cramped, but intensely connected to the outside world. Before we move on to Norway, it is worth pausing for a moment at the impressive defensive structure that protected Hedeby from the south. The Danevirke was a system of fortifications that stretched across the base of the Jutland Peninsula, forming a barrier between the Scandinavian world and the Germanic territories to the south. Built and expanded over centuries, including significant reinforcements in the 9th century, the Danevirke combined earthen ramparts, ditches, palisades, and later stone walls. It was both a military frontier and a political symbol, a declaration of Danish sovereignty that connected Hedeby's defenses in a continuous line, running from the marshes in the west to the Schlei Fjord in the east. In Norway, the equivalent of Birka and Hedeby was Kaupang, a trading settlement located beside Viksfjord in the Vestfold region, considered the first Norwegian urban center. Founded around 780, Kaupang was smaller than its sister cities in Sweden and Denmark, but played a crucial role in trade between Norway and the outside world. Its very name reveals its function, as Kaupang derives from the Old Norse Kaupanger, meaning market or place of buying. Archaeologists found evidence there of German wine in Rhenish ceramics, Slavic honey, whetstones from other parts of Norway, Danish ceramics, Frisian clothing, and even Frankish bookmounts and Irish jewelry. Unlike Hedeby and Birka, Kaupang was apparently not fortified, which suggests a relatively safe environment, perhaps protected by the presence of royal power nearby. The Vestfold region, where Kaupang was located, was possibly the richest and most fertile in Viking-era Norway, and it was from this same region that some of the most extraordinary archaeological finds of the Viking Age emerged. Around 820, on the shores of the Oslo Fjord, a ship was built with a skill that still impresses engineers and historians today. The Oseberg ship, as it became known, measures just over 21 meters in length and 5 meters in width, with 15 pairs of oars and a prow richly decorated with elaborate carvings in the style that bears its own name. Built primarily of oak, it was equipped with a mast that supported a square sail capable of propelling the vessel at considerable speeds. Decades later, around 890, another ship was built in the same region, the Gokstad ship, even larger and more robust, at nearly 24 meters in length, with 32 oars, and a construction that allowed it to sail in both the calm waters of fjords and the open ocean. These ships were not merely means of transport. They were symbols of power, wealth, and identity. They were the technology that made possible everything that defined the Viking Age, from the trade routes connecting the Baltic to the Islamic world, to the raids that terrorized the coasts of Western Europe. The shallow hull allowed navigation in waters barely over a meter deep and landing on beaches without the need for constructed harbors. The combination of flexibility and strength made these ships capable of withstanding the waves of the North Atlantic, and modern replicas have demonstrated that they were perfectly capable of crossing oceans. Thinking about the spiritual life of these peoples, Norse religion permeated every aspect of daily life. There was no clear separation between the sacred and the mundane, and the closest word the Norse had for religion was sider, meaning custom. The main gods were Odin, lord of war, wisdom, and death; Thor, protector of humanity and controller of the weather with his hammer; and Freya, associated with fertility and good harvests. Unlike other religious traditions, there was no organized priesthood nor temples exclusively dedicated to worship. The leaders of each community, the Godar, conducted ceremonies in their own homes or in outdoor spaces considered sacred, beside burial mounds, great stones, or venerated trees. The most important ritual was the blot, a sacrificial ceremony in which animals, including horses, were slaughtered and their blood sprinkled on the walls of the place of worship and upon the participants. The meat was then consumed in a great feast, and ale was blessed and drunk in honor of the gods, to the Aesir for victory and to the Vanir for fertility and peace. These rituals united the community and marked fixed points in the calendar, offering moments of gathering, celebration, and reaffirmation of the bonds between the human and the divine. In northeastern Sweden, at Uppsala, there existed what the sources describe as the most important pagan religious center in the region, a site associated with cults, sacrifices, and great festivals that attracted people from all over Scandinavia, and which would resist Christianization until the end of the 11th century. While life in the homelands followed this rhythm of farms, trade, and seasonal rituals, another dimension of Norse society was expanding with impressive speed. From the end of the 8th century, Scandinavian navigators began reaching ever more distant lands. The Swedes, known as Varangians, moved eastward, descending the rivers of present-day Russia and Ukraine, establishing settlements at Novgorod and Kiev, controlling trade routes that connected the Baltic to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Through these routes, Arab silver, silk, and spices flowed northward, while furs, slaves, wax, and amber traveled in the opposite direction. This trade network was so vast that coins minted in Baghdad and Central Asia were found buried in Swedish soil, bearing witness to connections spanning thousands of kilometers. At the same time, Norwegians and Danes expanded westward. Iceland began to be colonized in the late 9th century, mainly by Norwegians seeking new lands and freedom from political disputes at home. The Faroe Islands, Shetland, Orkney, and parts of Scotland and Ireland received permanent Norse settlements. Dublin was founded as a Viking base, and in Normandy, France, Norse settlers would eventually give the region its name. This simultaneous expansion to the east and west, driven by ships that could cross oceans and navigate rivers, transformed Scandinavia from a peripheral region of Europe into a force that influenced the continent's destiny for centuries. Amid all of this, at the end of the 9th century, the first sign of a fundamental transformation was beginning to manifest. Christianization, which had already reached the periphery of the Norse world through missionaries like Ansgar in Birka and Hedeby, was advancing slowly. In Denmark, formal conversion would only come at the end of the 10th century under Harald Bluetooth. In Norway and Sweden, the process would be even slower and more conflicted, but the seeds were already being planted, and over time, the new faith would bring with it changes in political organization, in the relationship with power, and in the very character of Norse societies. The world of the 9th century that we see in these images was at the height of its energy and reach, but also at the beginning of a transformation that would eventually bring to a close the very era that defined it. Now, I want to bring you to the present and show how these places look today. Thank you for being here, and if you have suggestions or requests for future cities, share them in the comments. Let's go. On the island of Björkö, where Birka thrived for over 200 years, today there is an archaeological site recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The trading town disappeared around 975, but the burial mounds, the ruins of the rampart, and the fortress atop the hill are still visible in the landscape, surrounded by green fields and the calm waters of Lake Mälaren, just 30 kilometers from Stockholm. Hedeby, which for centuries was the largest settlement in the entire region, was abandoned and destroyed in the mid-11th century. Today, the site lies near the town of Schleswig in northern Germany and houses a museum dedicated to the Viking Age, with reconstructions of buildings, sections of the rampart, and one of the original gates of the city. The Danevirke, the Great Wall that protected the Danish frontier, has also received recognition as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and stretches of the fortification are still visible in the landscape along marked trails. Kaupang, Norway's first marketplace, was abandoned in the early 10th century. Today, the archaeological site lies near Larvik, in southeastern Norway, in a landscape of agricultural fields and low coastal terrain. The sea level in the region has dropped about 3 meters since the Viking Age, so the old harbor is now set back from the water. Marked trails and informational panels guide visitors through the site, where merchants from distant lands once traded silver for furs. The Oseberg and Gokstad ships, discovered in burial mounds in the Vestfold region in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, were for decades on display at the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo. Currently, the museum is undergoing a major renovation and is expected to reopen as the Museum of the Viking Age, scheduled for 2026, where these extraordinary ships will once again welcome visitors from around the world. At Gamla Uppsala, where the most important pagan religious center in Scandinavia once stood, today there are 3 large royal burial mounds, a small medieval church built upon the remains of earlier structures, and a museum that tells the story of the site from the Iron Age to Christianization. The temple described by Adam of Bremen in the 11th century has disappeared, but the mounds remain, silent in the Swedish landscape, like marks of a time when the Norse gods still received offerings under dark winter skies. I truly appreciate you watching. Your ideas, contributions, and constructive comments really help shape what comes next. Feel free to leave a comment below. Until next time.